I was injured and lost my memory because of Michael Harris, but he took the opportunity to break up with me and personally destroyed all the evidence of our relationship. Then he hugged his childhood sweetheart, pushed his notorious brother in front of me, and smiled gently and distantly. Sarah Collins, this is your boyfriend. Later, I finally transferred my love to him, but he went to many famous doctors to try to restore my memory. He kept choking with regret and emphasizing, Sarah, the person you love is obviously me. I just smiled calmly at him as he was hysterical and asked him, yeah, where's the evidence? 1. On the way back from the hospital, I saw the hot search about actor Michael's love affair. Paparazzi leaked a video of him and famous actress Lauren Edwards holding hands and entering the hotel. Before netizens could react, the two openly admitted their relationship and revealed that they had known each other for a long time and were now reunited after a long separation, and they couldn't help but feel emotional. It instantly became a hot topic, and people all over the internet started sending their blessings. The movie King Michael and the only pure white Jasmine in the domestic entertainment industry, Lauren bravely entered the entertainment industry and finally met at the top. The ending made thousands of netizens cry for this beautiful love story. Within half an hour, articles about the story of their relationship were all over the internet. I clicked on the video information and carefully looked at the shooting time, and then read the love article from beginning to end without missing a word. They met in middle school. Michael had a crush on her, but they separated after taking the college entrance examination. Michael often visited her in college but never disturbed her. Later, they both entered the entertainment industry and went from obscurity to stardom. Hot searches exploded one after another, and the most mentioned comments were, wow, secret love plus white moonlight plus reunion after a long separation plus meeting at the top. This wave is a killer. Real couples are so cute. Yes, the two of them are currently starring in a university campus drama, which was filmed at Nanning University where I teach, and they are playing the male and female leads. This is also the reason why I was injured and went to the hospital. According to my colleagues who came to visit me, we met Michael and Lauren when we came out of the library and passed by a shooting location that was being built. Due to a worker's mistake, a prop wooden box fell down. I reacted quickly and rushed over and shouted, danger, then pushed Michael away and took the fall of the wooden box for him. He fainted on the spot and was in a coma for 3 days. When I woke up again, I had lost my memory. After exiting the hot search and opening WeChat, I subconsciously pulled the friend list to the top. My fingertips paused, but I didn't know where to stop. My heart inexplicably felt a little suffocated. I rolled down the car window, closed my eyes, leaned back in the seat, and let the evening breeze mess up my hair. In fact, I knew about Michael and Lauren's relationship earlier than anyone else. It was the day after I woke up. Michael appeared in the ward and returned my phone that I had left at the scene of the accident. He spoke politely but distantly. Miss Collins, thank you very much. We will cover all medical expenses. If you need anything else, please contact my agent. After saying that, he placed a pure black business card in front of me, and then smiled at me as if he had solved a problem that had troubled him for a long time. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I was slightly distracted as I looked at his deep and handsome features. When he turned and left without hesitation, I panicked and blurted out, wait a moment. A dull pain flashed through my head. I looked at him, who turned around, frowned and spoke with some difficulty. Michael, did we know each other before? It wasn't because of the dramas he acted in, nor was it because of the entertainment news, it was just simply, I knew him. After a moment's silence, it was Lauren who opened the door and answered me. She was wearing a white gauze dress, with her long curly hair scattered behind her shoulders. She held Michael's arm in front of me without any hesitation, took off her sunglasses and said to me, of course you know each other. As I was getting more and more confused, a tall figure appeared in the ward again. Michael pushed the man in front of me and said with a smile, Sarah, this is your boyfriend. Coincidentally, he's also my friend, too. His name is Andrew Turner. The second son of Turner, the largest group in Nanning, has countless scandals. He is a playboy, drinking, racing, fighting, and nothing else. I looked these up online later. To be honest, no matter how rich my imagination is, I can't guess how he and I met and fell in love. After Michael said that, I almost subconsciously looked at Andrew and asked him, you are my boyfriend? His peach blossom eyes flushed slightly. He half knelt beside the bed and looked up at me seriously. His voice was very gentle. It doesn't have to be. What I mean is, if you don't remember me, it's okay, we can get to know each other again and I'll pursue you again. In fact, the degree of familiarity I felt with him was far less than what I felt when I saw Michael. But inexplicably, when I lowered my head slightly and looked into his eyes, it seemed as if something sealed deep in my heart was about to burst out. Given the extreme lack of security caused by amnesia and all the evidence he provided, I regarded this indescribable feeling as the love he had forgotten. Choose to believe him. Later, after some time of contact, I found that he was actually very different from the rumors on the internet. He was said to have mood swings, but when he was taking care of me in the hospital, he did not show any impatience from beginning to end. Instead, he was considerate, gentle, and attentive to every detail. Only once did I gasp in pain because the nurse gave me the wrong injection, and he noticed it and immediately said in a cold voice, "Get out, change people." Although he is said to be cynical, he actually has excellent cooking skills and prepares almost every meal for me. And at this moment, because I accidentally fell asleep, he drove the car carefully, slowly, and steadily. When I woke up, I was covered with his black coat. The afterglow outside the window covered half the sky. Andrew was answering the phone under a tree not far away. His sleeves were rolled up to the middle of his forearms, and the strands of hair on his forehead were messy due to the wind. He turned his head and saw that I had woken up and was staring at him blankly, so he immediately hung up the phone and walked towards me. Although I accepted him as my boyfriend, I still felt a little strange towards him, so when he walked out the window, I held my coat and apologized carefully. "Sorry, I accidentally fell asleep. Did I bother you?" He opened the car door and helped me out, protecting my head. He leaned forward slightly and looked into my eyes intently, saying seriously and firmly, "Sarah, remember, you have absolute priority with me." 15 minutes later, we walked out of the elevator and stood in front of a door. Andrew skillfully pressed the code to open the door. Suddenly, a familiar yet unfamiliar breath came to my face. I walked in a bit slowly and stopped in front of the pure white sideboard, on which was a group photo. To be precise, it's a photo of me and a blurry figure. Judging from the angle, I was probably taking a selfie. The blurry figure was behind a frosted glass. Apart from being able to tell that it was an adult male, I couldn't accurately identify who he was. I suddenly remembered that a while ago, a colleague in the ward was peeling an orange and whispering to me, "I only heard you say you had a boyfriend before, but you were not comfortable revealing who he was, and I never saw him come to see you." It was so secretive that my colleagues with wild imaginations even guessed which celebrity he was. "So, it's the second son of the Turner family." I raised my hand and gently touched the figure behind the glass frame, and called out his name for the first time since we met. "Andrew." 3. The next time I saw Michael was on a Wednesday evening, when I returned to school to continue teaching. When I passed an empty classroom on the way back to the office from the laboratory building, I saw him and Lauren sitting in 2 seats by the window and being interviewed by reporters. The molten gold sunset penetrated the white gauze curtain blown by the wind and fell on half of Michael's body, as if coating him with a layer of light. There is something I have never told anyone. Whenever it is late at night and everyone is asleep, I always start to feel sad uncontrollably. The aching pain in my heart almost makes it impossible for me to sleep. It felt like I had lost a very important person, but when I tossed and turned in my mind, the image of Michael appeared. Then I would suddenly wake up and ask myself in disbelief, "Sarah, what are you thinking about?" No one could tell me why I thought of Michael, just like now no one could explain to me why I felt so sad when I saw him and Lauren sitting side by side and smiling at each other. The reporter intentionally created a romantic and ambiguous atmosphere, and all the questions she asked were about their relationship. She asked Michael, "Can you describe Lauren in 1 sentence?" Michael tilted his head to look at her lovingly and said gently, "She was a ray of light that shone into my dark life." I thought about it, this is probably like how netizens summarized the two. Having experienced domestic violence from his alcoholic father since childhood, the tenacious and poor male protagonist met a gentle and kind-hearted rich girl in middle school, and was redeemed. From then on, the rich girl became the white moonlight of his life. The reporter laughed and said, "Wow," after getting the answer, and then she asked Lauren, What similarities do you think Michael has with the male lead in the drama you are currently filming? She answered without hesitation. Of course, I'm just as devoted. I stood quietly at the back door, like a dark peeping torrent, spying on their hard-earned happiness, until the cell phone in my pocket suddenly rang, pulling me back from my wandering thoughts and interrupting their interview. The spacious and bright classroom seemed to be paused in an instant, and several pairs of eyes looked towards me. I hurriedly pressed the hang-up button, tightly gripped the phone, suppressed the inexplicable bitterness in my heart and apologized. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm just passing by and I'll leave now. Lauren smiled calmly. Mr. Collins, please don't bother us. We are done now. As soon as she finished speaking, the reporter said that since we knew each other, she would leave first to catch up with her next schedule. Soon there were only 3 of us left. Lauren walked gracefully to me and asked gently, "Since you saved our Michael unexpectedly, you deserve some compensation. How much does Mr. Collins want?" I was stunned for a moment, looked at Michael, who had been sitting in his seat with his back to me and had not come over, then looked at Lauren in front of me. I explained seriously that I had never thought about asking for any compensation. Lauren's voice was still gentle and leisurely, but every word was a warning. "Miss Sarah, you are a role model for others. Don't let this give rise to any inappropriate fantasies." 4. After the interview was broadcast, Michael was awarded the title of the entertainment industry's affection ceiling, and his popularity and fans continued to rise. I began to deliberately avoid anyone and anything related to him, and turned my attention to Andrew. Although I can't remember why I was with him in the first place, it must have been a decision I made after careful consideration at the time. Now that an accident has happened, I don't want to hurt my lover in a state of amnesia. So even though I'm still confused, I'm still willing to get to know him again and fall in love with him again. So after thinking it over, I carefully selected my words and asked him, "How did I get along with you before?" He was peeling a grapefruit for me at the time. He paused his fingers, tilted his head and looked at me seriously and said, "Sarah, you don't have to be like you used to be. I like you as long as you are me. Just do what you want to do." I realized from the stunned look in his eyes that what he meant was that he didn't ask me to love him as much as before, but he would still love me as much as before. A subtle emotion suddenly surged in my heart, and I suddenly felt inexplicably fortunate that the person with me was him. After that, we started to act like all normal couples, having dinner and dating together, going shopping and watching movies together. Occasionally I would try to recall my past with him, but the result was always a blank. But in the second month after I lost my memory, when Andrew came to pick me up from get off work, my colleague ran over happily and handed me a beautifully wrapped gift box, telling me, "Sarah, the watch we ordered together a year ago has arrived." To my puzzled look, she explained that it was a watch shop opened by her friend, and that every watch was handmade and unique. Once when she took me to visit, I described my preferred style to the designer and ordered one, saying I would give it to my boyfriend. He also left a message card. To be honest, the watch is indeed exquisitely made and low-key, but its temperament is extremely incompatible with Andrew. Below is the card I left a message on. Andrew didn't say a word from beginning to end, until he reached out and slowly opened the card, and his frowning brows suddenly relaxed. I thought he also felt that the watch was not suitable for him, so I looked down at the watch on his wrist that was worth tens of millions and whispered, "If you don't like it, that's fine." After all, I don't know whether there was something wrong with my description of the designer or there was a problem in the production process of the watch, which led to the current situation. After he finished speaking, he chuckled in a very hoarse voice and said to me word by word, I like it very much. As long as it's a gift from you, I like it." After saying that, he immediately put on the watch I gave him and has never taken it off since then. Later, I became curious about what message I left on the card, so I opened it and took a look. It was indeed my handwriting, but on a clean, neat page with only one letter. I held the card in my hand and lost myself in the sound of the wind whistling past the window for a long time, guessing that it must mean Andrew. 5. On the day when Michael and Lauren's campus drama was finished filming, I accidentally saw their live broadcast during a break in a meeting. Someone asked him why he was attracted to Lauren. In the video, he shifted his gaze a little, as if he was reminiscing or thinking, and finally looked at Lauren lovingly and said, She is more beautiful than anything I have ever seen. Considering his background, I can probably understand what he means. If a person who lives in darkness suddenly meets someone who is completely opposite to himself one day, it is indeed easy for him to be attracted. After hearing the answer, someone else asked him, "Have you really never been attracted to anyone else in all these years? Have you only liked Lauren?" After seeing the question, he suddenly became quiet for a few seconds, and the smile on his lips faded a little. No one knows whether he was deciding on his feelings or thinking about someone else during those few seconds of silence. But after the silence, he looked at the screen and answered firmly, "No." There was a burst of cheers in the barrage of the live broadcast room, and fans frantically swiped the screen with hearts and roses. It was at this moment that I suddenly realized that I hadn't thought of him for a long time. Now even if I saw him again, there would be no ripples in my heart. I don't know when the empty feeling that kept me awake at night disappeared. I can't explain why, but this discovery made me feel relaxed and a little happy. Later, after the meeting, I walked happily out of the school gate holding an umbrella. In the misty night, I saw Andrew's car parked quietly under a dim street light. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, and 3.5 hours had passed since I was notified of a meeting and sent him a message saying that he didn't need to wait for me. Raindrops slid down the glass window, and my heart suddenly became damp. After being surprised, I sat in the car and sighed helplessly. "It's so late. I told you not to wait for me." He carefully wiped the water drops on my cheeks with a towel. His clear and dark eyes fell on my face, and he said very seriously, "But I want to see you, so you will wait for me." An unknown chaotic atmosphere arose in the narrow and slightly damp carriage. I looked at his handsome features and my heart beat faster uncontrollably. I seemed to understand why I had fallen in love with him before I lost my memory. I think if nothing unexpected happens, Andrew will be the person I am willing to spend my life with. Even if I can't remember the past, I will fall in love with him again sooner or later. But the accident happened. Just half a month later, on an evening with rosy clouds in the sky, Andrew and I walked out of the restaurant and onto a commercial street. We were about to go to the flower shop next door to buy a bunch of hyacinths. A huge billboard on the exterior of the building suddenly fell down. It is a ring advertisement shot by Michael and Lauren with the theme of love only one person in your life. Andrew reacted quickly and hugged me and rushed to the side, thus saving us from danger. But the loud noise of the billboard falling to the ground, the chaotic voices and car sounds, and the overly familiar scene made me feel dizzy and have a strong tinnitus. Until the sudden sound of the police siren, like a sharp blade, unexpectedly cut a hole in my dusty memories. Countless fragments of images rushed into my mind. 6. Michael and I have been childhood sweethearts who have known each other for 18 years. They are also a couple who have been together for 4 years. The year they met, he was a thin boy who had no mother and was often abused by his father. And I was a girl who was abducted by human traffickers and sent to that poor and remote mountain village. I used a lotus leaf to scoop up clean water to save him when he fainted on the roadside under the scorching sun due to domestic violence. When I was bullied by thugs from the same village, he held a stone tightly and protected me behind him. During that dark time, every word he taught me was like a shining star, carrying my wishes. Until I saw a handwritten sentence on a book he brought that was donated from outside the mountain. "As long as you never give up, you will definitely see hope." The hope buried deep in my heart suddenly sprouted, and I told Michael, "We can't rot here, let's run away, Michael." I was not allowed to study or run around, but Michael was allowed to do whatever he wanted. If he wanted to leave, he could leave. He hesitated at first, but when he was nearly beaten to death again by his alcoholic father, we fled. That year I was 13 years old and it was my 5th year in the mountain village. We had a long, hard time after that. Fortunately, thanks to social assistance, we have the opportunity to study. But because I had never been to school, I started much later than Michael. So when he was in high school, I was still catching up on junior high school content. It was at that time that Michael met Lauren. But the first time I heard this name and met this person was on the night of their graduation party, after Michael finished the college entrance examination. I was waiting for Michael outside the hotel with my coat in my arms. After the meeting, as I was carefully supporting the drunk Michael, I suddenly heard someone shouting, "Lauren!" At that moment, Michael's body stiffened slightly. I subconsciously looked in the direction of the voice, but I couldn't see his face clearly, only a beautiful and slender back. After we got back, Michael fell into my arms drunk, mumbling to himself, "How can I, who is stuck in the mud, touch the moon?" I thought he was talking about his dreams, so I studied hard to make money, helped him analyze the personality of every role he got, and applied for countless small accounts to become his fan and encourage him. Carefully guard his dream. But I didn't expect the moon he was talking about was Lauren. Once upon a time he was stuck in a quagmire and couldn't touch the moon. Later, he became as bright as a star, and the moon came running towards him. The first movie he acted in with Lauren was after he won the Best Actor award. They played each other's first love in the drama, but Lauren's character died in the year when the male protagonist played by Michael loved her the most. So even though she didn't have many scenes and almost no lines, the romantic setting, deep love and unforgettable ending earned her the title of the only pure white jasmine in the domestic entertainment industry shortly after her debut. Since then, almost every play she has starred in has been related to Michael, until this campus drama, so everything has a traceable path. That's why the day he said he didn't have time to accompany me to the Nanjing ancient temple to pray for good luck every year, he was in the hotel with Lauren. Then when I was injured and lost my memory because of him, he ended our relationship and destroyed all the evidence of our relationship with his own hands. 7. Andrew drove very fast and finally stopped outside the hospital. He was still worried, so he carefully helped me out of the car and took me to see a doctor for a checkup. I let him hold my hand and followed him absent-mindedly. The knuckles on the back of his hands were rubbed against the ground, leaving blood marks. His black shirt was stained when he was protecting me. His messy short hair was blown by the evening breeze, and he looked a little disheveled. This is two extremes from when I first met him. Half a year ago, at a colleague's birthday party, I was on my way back to the private room from the bathroom when I mistakenly entered their private room because of harassment from a drunk man. Under the dim flickering lights, there are all kinds of handsome men and beautiful women gathered. But I saw Andrew casually leaning on the sofa with his legs crossed, playing with his lighter. At that time he was dignified, elegant, lazy and casual, and even Michael, who sat next to him, was 3 points inferior to him. Later, the drunk man grabbed me tightly and said that I was his girlfriend. Michael turned his head away from my gaze seeking help, and everyone was watching the fun as if it had nothing to do with them. Only Andrew, he dropped his lighter and walked up to me. The overly powerful aura caused the drunk man to stop moving for a moment. Andrew asked me, "Are you his girlfriend?" I shook my head helplessly and explained hastily and firmly, "No, I'm not. I don't know him." After saying that, he suddenly smiled at me and said soothingly, "Don't be afraid, you are pretty, I believe you." Then, before anyone could react, he quickly grabbed the drunk man's wrist to force him to let go of me. Then he picked up a bottle of wine and smashed it on his head without hesitation. With a loud bang, the box suddenly became silent. He sent me back to the box in a daze, and I even forgot to say thank you. At first I thought he was simply acting bravely, until the party was over and I passed by the box again, and saw that the door was half open and the crowd had dispersed. Someone asked Andrew, "Why did Mr. Fong save her just now?" After a long while, Andrew spoke in a low voice. I remembered the pain and tenderness in his voice for a long time. He said, "I saw her shadow in those eyes." She? The memories came to an abrupt end. I stopped abruptly and clenched his fingers with my backhand. People were coming and going in the hospital. Andrew turned around in confusion and asked gently, "What's wrong?" I avoided his gaze and looked at his wrist. My throat was inexplicably sore when I spoke. "I'm fine, no need to check." "And Andrew, take off your watch. It's not for you." "A means." "Michael." 8. I took the taxi with my watch, and the figure standing there like a sculpture reflected in the rearview mirror gradually disappeared. I opened my phone and searched for keywords related to Michael. I carefully watched every detail of his and Lauren's lives, until the recent scene where they recreated their confession on a reality show for outdoor couples. The sea of flowers, sunset, and hot air balloons represent infinite romance and love. The moisture in my eyes was dried by the wind. I think back to the night when Michael asked me to be together. I was a junior that year. When I was going back from a class reunion, a male classmate gave me a ride. When we arrived at the community, he suddenly confessed his love to me. I was so shocked that I didn't even have time to react before Michael, who had just returned, grabbed me from behind. He said coldly to the male student, "She already has a boyfriend." I stood there in a daze until the boy apologized and left. Then I reacted and whispered to Michael, What did you just say?" He held my hand tightly and said to me, "Sarah, let's be together. I really like him." When I was 8 years old, I was trafficked to a mountain village. I was beaten for crying and had a high fever for several days, which caused me to forget many people and things. Later, we rescued Michael, who was unconscious on the roadside. As I watched his back as he left, I inexplicably had an urge to follow him. They then depended on each other for decades and had seen each other at their most miserable. So ending up with him seemed like the most normal thing. To cooperate with him, I never talked about our relationship in front of others, and only used a small why to express my feelings. Not long after they got together, he became famous for a supporting role that lasted less than half an hour. It has been rising ever since. The distance between me and him is getting farther and farther. Looking back now, Michael would not have proposed to me if any of the following conditions had not been met. Lauren hadn't left, or the male classmate hadn't confessed his love to me. After all, he never said he liked me. After closing the page, paying and getting off the car, I casually threw the watch into a trash can on the side of the road. Since he wants to erase all the past between us, I don't want it either. If it weren't for the kidnapping accident, we would have been people from two completely different worlds and would never have had any relationship. Just like now. And later. I had no intention of pestering Michael. He's not worth any more of my emotion. However, the day after I recovered my memory, his relationship with Lauren became a hot topic again. The cause was that the two encountered heavy rain and landslides while exploring the mountains in a wild couple reality show. Due to the crew's inadequate protective measures, everyone, including the staff, were injured to varying degrees. Among them, Michael was the most seriously injured. At that time, he was walking at the end of the team and in a low-lying area because he was carrying Lauren, who had a sore foot. Later, when the danger occurred, Michael lifted Lauren up and climbed to a higher place, but Lauren was afraid of being hit by falling rocks and trees, so she did not turn back to pull Michael but ran away instead. The chaotic and fragmented video was leaked by someone. Netizens have different opinions on what is true and what is false. The most popular video is, "How can a girl like Lauren pull a 1.80-meter tall man? She must have called for help." I understand. When disaster strikes, everyone runs for their own lives. Why wasn't Lauren the one in trouble? How could she be worthy of Michael's affection? The only two people who know the truth. Lauren remained silent throughout. Michael survived the accident but broke his leg and fell into a coma. A colleague holding his phone sighed, "Have these two been punished by God? You saved them from a disaster last time. But now they are facing a more serious disaster. It's true that you can't avoid disaster." I turned off the screen and stopped paying attention, smiling. Maybe. 9. I didn't tell anyone except Andrew about my memory recovery, so no one knew about my separation from him. But my life returned to normal, but I would often look towards a window seat where few people sat before class. That's where Andrew would sit whenever he sneaked in to attend my public classes wearing a black sweatshirt and a baseball cap of the same color. In a classroom with hundreds of people, as soon as he appears, I can always see him at a glance. But he never made a sound to disturb others. He just focused and seriously held a pen and drew on the paper. The plain white paper, the ink-colored lines, every time he sketched with just a few strokes, it was me giving a lecture. She has almond-shaped eyes, curved eyebrows, and her long hair is tied up. Even the small mole between her left eyebrow is taken into consideration. I was amazed at his painting skills. He would hold the painting and exclaim, "The people I drew are so pretty." When I once again absent-mindedly looked at that spot through the crowd of heads before class, a student in the front row came over and asked, "Who are you waiting for, teacher?" I tightened my grip on the textbook, lowered my head, smiled and spoke naturally. "I'm not waiting for anyone. No one will come." Later, when the bell rang for the end of get out of class, I stood on the podium and waited for the students to leave as usual. A few minutes later, just as I was walking down the podium with the book in my arms, wind suddenly blew in from the open window, and a piece of paper was rolled up from somewhere, floated across half of the classroom, and finally landed in front of the door. The bright sunlight falls on the paper, and every perfect line is clearly visible. My heart suddenly started beating wildly. I looked back at the empty classroom and stood there for a long time. I have to admit that if my feelings for Michael died during the period of amnesia, then my feelings for Andrew also grew during the period of amnesia. But I understand better than anyone that the person he really likes is not me. So after I recovered my memory, I have been deliberately avoiding meeting him. Until that night when I attended a bachelorette party hosted by a rich second-generation colleague. I left the bustling box to get some fresh air. While leaning on the glass handrail of the hotel to reply to messages, I accidentally saw someone standing in the transparent elevator rising opposite. It's Andrew. He was wearing a pure black shirt with his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He held his suit jacket in his left hand and his right hand was casually in his pocket. Behind him were several people of similar age. When our eyes met, the elevator had stopped and I saw someone patted him on the shoulder, reminding him that it was time to leave. I withdrew my gaze and returned to the box. Someone handed me a glass of grapefruit juice and asked if I wanted to attend the next event after it was over, but I politely declined. Sitting in the dim corner, I looked at the flickering colored lights and inappropriately recalled the first time I saw Andrew after waking up from amnesia in the ward. In fact, the evidence he provided about our being together had many loopholes, and I could find the flaws if I thought about it more carefully. But at that time I had just lost my memory, and I needed a sense of security so much that I subconsciously looked for excuses to rationalize everything that was unreasonable. I think Michael didn't consider the danger I would face when he made the decision to abandon me. Now thinking about it, I am glad that the person who pretended to be my boyfriend was Andrew. After the party, I sat alone in the completely quiet box for a while, until I finished the last sip of grapefruit juice in my glass. Then I stood up and opened the door of the box. Then I saw Andrew, who had been standing outside the door for who knows how long. He put his hands in his pockets, tilted his head slightly, and leaned casually against the wall, as if he had been waiting for the door to be opened. A faint smell of alcohol floated in the air. I was silent for a moment and asked him, "What's the matter?" "I want to see you." The overly frank and straightforward answer made me at a loss for words for a moment, so I could only sigh and tell him, "Andrew, we have no relationship anymore. What if I say I really like you?" In fact, I once looked in the mirror and imagined how much I resembled that girl, which was why he could be so affectionate and unwilling to let go. But he saved me once and cheated me once. Steven. So when he spoke again, "Sarah, actually I interrupted him. "Need I get this straight? Andrew, I don't want anything to do with you, ever, now or ever." The lesson I learned from Michael taught me that a wrong relationship should not exist in the first place. Maybe it was because of the light. His face turned pale for a moment. He opened his mouth for a long time, and then he asked me in a hoarse voice, "Is it not possible to be friends?" I looked at him and refused firmly. "I don't need you as a friend." 10. I thought that after explaining everything to Andrew, I would be able to feel inner peace, but that was not the case. Every night when I tossed and turned, all I thought about was his pale face. So much so that every little thing that happened in the short time I had been with him began to appear clearly in my mind. The bad thing is, he still keeps coming to me, wants to see me, and always appears around me in various ways. Over time I became particularly sensitive to his figure, name, and the unique faint pine scent on his body. As a result, when I see someone similar, I will subconsciously avoid them. I know it's not him I'm hiding from, but it's your own heart. The day I saw the news that Andrew had taken over as the head of Turner, I was shopping in the supermarket. Countless financial and entertainment media reported information about him. He lost his mother at a young age, and his father remarried. The child his stepmother brought turned out to be his half-brother. Later, he was suppressed and hated, and could only hide his strength and cover up his ambitions, just to seize power one day. It is worth mentioning that some people discovered that he has been doing charity since he was a child, donating supplies to orphanages and remote mountainous areas every year. I stood among the shelves filled with all kinds of juice and looked up at the large screen hanging above. It showed countless reporters holding microphones in front of Andrew for interviews. The man in the video is neither the cynical man as netizens once described him to be, nor the gentle and elegant man as I remembered him to be. Instead, He was cold and distant, looking down on others, and exuded the aura of a superior. The reporter deliberately asked why he was the one sitting in this position instead of his brother, who was an elite overseas student and had great abilities. Facing the difficulties, he looked down upon the person in front of him and smiled faintly. "Don't you understand that the strong prevail?" Somehow, I suddenly remembered the scene when he used a wine bottle to hit someone to save me. Perhaps that was the real him, gentle yet cruel, cold yet crazy. But the short time I spent with him didn't allow me enough time to get to know his family. So this was the first time I knew about his background. I had guessed that he was behind those rumors, but I didn't expect it to be for this reason. The next second, a gossipy reporter in the video asked, "There's news that Mr. Fong has been looking for a girl. Is she his sweetheart?" The scene was quiet for a moment. Andrew looked at the camera with gentle eyes and said, "Yes." I calmly withdrew my gaze and continued my purchase. It wasn't until I checked out that I realized I had the wrong juice. 11. After that, Andrew continued to appear by my side as always. Although he never mentioned being with me again, everything he did told me that he hadn't given up. If my car breaks down in heavy rain, he will be the first one to arrive. If I sprained my ankle while hiking, he would appear and carry me down the mountain. Until one day when I was at home recuperating from the flu I had caught at school, he knocked on the door. My fever had not completely subsided at that time, and the little bit of rationality I had left was still reminding me to keep my distance from him, so I said, "Stay away from me, you will be infected," and then closed the door. He stretched out his hand to block it, squeezed into the house, closed the door, looked at me and said, "I'm not afraid." My head was dizzy from taking the medicine and I didn't have the energy to argue with him, so I just lay down on the sofa and let him do what he wanted. When I was with Michael, he rarely had time to spend with me whenever I was sick. Most of the time I went to the hospital alone, took medicine alone, and recovered alone. I am not a squeamish person. I can understand that he is very busy. I can also be alone without his care. But now I vaguely saw Andrew feeding me water and then going to the kitchen to cook porridge, and I felt a little curious. So I asked him, "Andrew, aren't you busy?" He has just taken charge of the company, and there will only be more things for him to deal with, not less. To me, it would just be a waste of time. He squatted beside the sofa and wiped my cheek carefully with a wet towel. His breath was so close to me that it fell lightly on my cheek. It was almost unavoidable. After a long time, I heard him say, "Sarah, I remember I said that nothing is more important than you." Perhaps it was because my emotions became more sensitive after being sick, and my heart couldn't help but feel a pang of pain. Obviously, I wasn't this sad when I was sick and alone before. I closed my eyes and stopped talking, but I couldn't fall asleep. All I could hear was the sound of his very light movements, which didn't disturb me, but made me feel extremely at ease. I don't know how much time had passed, but night had fallen. I opened my eyes and saw Andrew in the kitchen holding a pile of medicine boxes and looking at their instructions. The orange sunset fell on him through the glass. I stepped on the soft carpet, walked over and quietly leaned against the kitchen door, looking at his back, and then said in a hoarse voice, "Andrew, did you find the girl?" His back froze for a moment. He put down the medicine box in his hand and turned to look at me. "Found it." My throat hurt a little, and I wanted to ask why he bothered me, but in order to maintain a little decency, I asked him, "Aren't you guys together?" He took a step closer and sighed. "She said she didn't want to be with me, didn't want anything to do with me. So you're going to come to me and use me as a substitute?" And I just borrowed her light and was loved for a short time. I felt my heart tremble a little. I lowered my head and didn't want to look him in the eye. A tear fell from my eyes and soaked into his trouser legs. Finally, I compromised and said, "Andrew, could you please stop doing this? I admit that I like you, but that doesn't make me give up my principles and become a substitute. Why do you have to keep pressing on?" His breathing became heavier, and he repeated word by word, "You like me." I lowered my head and cried silently until he suddenly held me tightly in his arms. Although my dizziness became worse due to the ups and downs of emotions, it did not affect my hearing him say, "Sarah, you were the one who said you didn't want anything to do with me." My tense heartstrings suddenly broke at this moment, and something slowly emerged in my mind. I belatedly asked him, "It's me." He gently pressed my head against his chest and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Yes, it's you. 18 years is really too long." 12. After I was beaten when I was 8 years old and had a high fever for several days, I forgot everything that happened before that. My earliest memories begin after I was 8 years old, so I didn't know who my parents or relatives were. Even though I later thought about finding my family, there was no news for so many years. But I never imagined that Andrew would be my family before I was 8 years old. When I was 3 years old, my parents died accidentally in a chemical experiment explosion. I was taken home and raised by my mother's best friend. After that, Andrew appeared in my life. We were together for 5 years until I was 8 years old, when Andrew's father took me to see Andrew as an excuse to meet his first love, then lost me. For the next 18 years, Andrew kept looking for me. This is what he told me. But this memory has long disappeared from my mind and may never appear again, making me unsure if I am the person he is looking for. After all, I have no family, so how can I prove it? What if he recognized the wrong person? I asked him this question the next day. Hearing this, he handed me a photo album containing all the photos of him and me, from the age of 3 until the age of 8. Without exception, there is always a small mole between the left eyebrow of the girls in the photos. After the age of 8, there was a hand-drawn girl next to him in every photo. That's the picture he drew of me. I have been painting for 18 years. Perhaps because he saw that I had been silent and was worried that I would be saddened by the past, he pretended to be relaxed and spoke. "I imagine you as you grow older, but it's just imagination after all, and it's not as good-looking as the real you." I held the album in my hands and listened quietly, then asked him, "Is it just because of the mole between the eyebrows?" He paused, took out the last photo of us, turned it over, and saw a sentence written crookedly on it. "Together forever." Below the words are 2 small fingerprints. I looked at that sentence and heard Andrew laugh at himself. No one knew at that time that we would be separated completely just after we said we would be together forever. Shortly thereafter, Andrew took me to visit my parents and his mother. I also saw the culprit he said killed his mother and lost me, his father. In the cold and lonely ward, Andrew held my hand and stood in front of the bed, smiling nonchalantly, and said to the person on the bed who couldn't speak because of a stroke, "I have good news for you, do you want to hear it?" After that, he opened a paternity test report in front of him and spoke word by word. "Congratulations! You have raised someone else's son for 29 years. You must live well. Don't die of anger by accident and dirty my mother's reincarnation path." After saying that, he threw the report at his father, smiled with red eyes, then took me in his arms and left the ward. Before leaving, I looked back and saw the person on the hospital bed. He was looking at the ceiling in shock and hopelessness, with tears in his eyes. Of course I won't sympathize with him. He has sown the seeds himself, so he should taste the fruits himself. The next time I heard from Michael was when he woke up from his coma. Then came the hot searches about his sudden breakup with Lauren. The relationship that was once blessed by the entire internet ended in a mess. No one cared about the truth of the incident at that time. Shortly after that, Lauren was photographed having dinner and watching a movie with a new top star. After scoring twice, the two openly admitted their relationship. It is said that they are each other's first love, have known each other since childhood, and are now renewing their relationship. A new batch of CP fans said, "Oh my God! Childhood sweethearts plus first love plus reunion. I'm so excited." Michael's legs are not completely disabled and he can walk with the help of crutches. During the time he was in the hospital after waking up, he called me countless times. I looked at the string of numbers that had no notes but were extremely familiar to me, and didn't answer any of them. Finally, he was blacklisted. Later, he probably borrowed someone else's phone to call me. I answered the call once by accident. I heard him call Sarah, and then hung up. In fact, before he was discharged from the hospital, I passed by his ward when I went to the hospital to visit a highly respected professor. He seemed to be arguing with Lauren at the time, and both of them were emotionally unstable, so much so that I could clearly hear Lauren loudly asking him, "I didn't mean to not pull you up. It was so dangerous at the time. What if I got hit? Michael, don't you love me very much? Why are you blaming me? Besides, you're only a burden to me now." After a long while, Michael chuckled softly. His voice was very hoarse. Roll. I don't know whether his chuckle was mocking his self-proclaimed mutual love or regretting his past deep affection for her. But that has nothing to do with me anymore. But he still came to see me shortly after he was discharged from the hospital. I wasn't surprised because I knew this day would come sooner or later. That night, as I stepped out of the elevator holding a bunch of hyacinths, I saw him standing outside my house with a cane. He was wearing a black windbreaker, his hair was cut short, there were obvious red bloodshot in his eyes, his cheeks were slightly sunken, and he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. When he saw me, he suddenly came closer with red eyes. Sarah. I took a step back and looked at him distantly. Mr. Harris, do we know each other well? He suddenly grabbed my hand and spoke quickly. Sarah, I'm your boyfriend, Andrew isn't. He lied to you. Lauren and I are just in a contractual relationship, Sarah. The person you've always loved is me. I looked at him calmly and doubtfully, then pulled my hand away little by little and asked him, Really? Then how are you going to prove it? You're the one I like? He couldn't produce any evidence. Then he started trying to get me to see a doctor. He said, Sarah, you just forgot about me. Once you remember me, you will know who you really like. I have found the most famous brain doctor. He will definitely help you restore your memory. When I refused to go to the hospital with him, he told me about the past, how we had escaped from the remote mountains with great difficulty, how we had lived in the basement together, eaten instant noodles, and promised to be together forever. She said that I had taken care of him while he was sick, and that I had waited for him in the snow for a whole night to audition with him. You see, he remembers everything. But he would still abandon me without hesitation. The person who once least wanted me to restore my memory is now trying every possible means to help me restore my memory. I guess he never thought that one day he would look back. Looking at his slightly red eyes and his humble begging look, I am indifferent. The afternoon I refused to see him again, I received a letter. I wrote it 4 years ago. That was when Michael and I had just started dating, and it suddenly became popular online to write letters to your future self. I thought it was interesting, so I asked Michael to write one too. But he didn't write it, only I did. If nothing unexpected happens, this is probably the only evidence that can prove that we were together. The sky after the rain was filled with sunset glow, and the sky looked like it was on fire. I took the letter into the bathroom without opening it. Burnt. 14. After that, for a long time he was preoccupied with health and work, and was unable to continue to bother me. We met again in early autumn. I came out of the library and walked on Wutong Road. The yellow fallen leaves were slowly falling. When I saw a pavilion not far away, I stopped unconsciously. It was here that I first saw. I heard the rustling sound of sycamore leaves underfoot behind me. I stood still and heard a low, hoarse voice. It was here that you blocked a wooden box for me, and then you forgot about me. Somehow, I suddenly remembered the hot search I saw a few days ago. The top star who reunited with Lauren already had a girlfriend, but he lied to his girlfriend and said he and Lauren were just a couple, but he was soon found to be cheating. The girlfriend immediately threw out the evidence and accused the two men of cheating and meddling. Amid netizens' angry scolding of the two, some people began to summarize Lauren's representative work since her debut. Dating the movie king. Dating the top star. Not long after, a new pure white jasmine appeared in domestic entertainment. As for Michael, his leg injury restricted his acting skills, and the fans who claimed they would always be with him gradually turned their attention to the new actors in the circle. There are many people who are younger, more handsome, and healthier than him. Sooner or later, he will end up being ignored by everyone. So after finishing his last movie about rebirth and changing destiny, he announced that he would no longer appear in any TV series or movies. Only occasionally participate in some variety shows. But at least, he left behind the title of the most affectionate host in the domestic entertainment industry. After all, after that, all the variety shows or activities he participated in would be hosted with this title. Wow, welcome to our domestic entertainment's affectionate ceiling, Michael. No one knows what he feels every time he hears this name. Just like my story with him, no one will know it anymore. My thoughts returned, and I turned to look at him, smiling with relief. Yeah, I don't remember. After saying that, I turned and left. A few steps later, the wind brought his mumblings to my ears. If I could go back to the year when we first met, I would never let go of your hand again. I paused slightly, curled my lips, and continued walking forward. He was wrong. If I could go back to that year, I would not meet him again. Now I am just returning to the right track of fate. At the end of the road there stood Andrew. I ran towards him, he reached out to catch me, and then took me to a private garden that was decorated in an extremely romantic way. Ever since I found out about my background, he and I tacitly agreed not to mention being together. So at this moment I thought he was going to confess his love, but then I saw him slowly pushing a cake towards me and saying, "Happy birthday, Sarah." I was in a trance for a moment while holding the flowers. It turned out that this day was my real birthday. Later, he placed 18 exquisitely packaged boxes in front of me, his eyes dark and bright. "This is a gift that is 18 years late." My eyes felt sore, and I smiled and looked at him with tears in my eyes. "Andrew, you don't have to be so nice to me. This feeling of being cherished makes me feel a little overwhelmed." He held my face and looked into my eyes. "I signed and sealed it, promising to treat you well for the rest of my life." I looked at the handsome face so close to me, and with an impulse I stood on tiptoe and kissed the side of his cheek. In an instant, his whole body stiffened, and a red patch quickly turned red at the base of his ears and continued to spread. This made me want to laugh. While he was still standing there in a daze, I took out my watch from my bag, glanced at his empty wrist, and said to him, "Stretch out your hand." He obediently stretched out his hand in front of me and let me carefully put the watch on him. There was a subtle scent in the air, which inexplicably gave me the illusion that I was putting a ring on him. Just as I put on the watch and admired it carefully, he suddenly grabbed the back of my head, quickly moved closer, and took my breath away. A few minutes later, I opened my phone camera and took a picture. My face was not much redder than his because I forgot to breathe and caused lack of oxygen. Just as I was about to take a closer look to see if there was any breakage at the corners of my lips, Andrew suddenly stepped into the camera, grabbed my hand and phone, and pressed the shutter button. Since then, the group photo that we took when we were 8 years old has been discontinued. From this moment on, it resumed. Extra. Andrew. The longest road I have ever walked in my life is the road to meet Sarah. A full 18 years. If it hadn't been for that accident, I would have been the one who stayed with her and grew up with her. To this day, I still remember that ordinary afternoon when I came back from cello class and learned that Sarah was lost. I was 10 years old that year, and it was the first time I experienced the feeling of separation from an important person. I couldn't sleep all night holding the photo we took the day before. After that, I started donating money and supplies to various orphanages and poor mountainous areas for charity. Even if there is only a 1 in 10,000 chance, I hope that Sarah can have a better life in some corner. I also learned to paint, imagining what she would look like as she grew older. As the family business grew bigger, my father's extramarital affair was discovered. I then realized that he had used the excuse of bringing Sarah to see me that day to meet his first love and lost Sarah. The following year, my mother died of depression. He became a family with his first love and their illegitimate child. I became the most redundant person, but there is no such good thing in the world. He used the money my mother brought to start a business and then forced my mother to death. In the end, their family lived happily ever after. Later, under the surveillance and suppression of that woman, I became a playboy with no ambition to make progress as she wished, and hung out with a bunch of bad friends every day. Then at a party I met Sarah. When she pushed the door open in panic and looked at me with a pair of frightened eyes, my heart suddenly skipped a beat. But in these 18 years I have met too many people who are similar to her in my memory, and the result is disappointment every time. So this time after I sent her back to the box I hesitated. What if the result of the verification was disappointing again? I heard that there is a 1,000-year-old tree in the ancient temple in the south of the city that can make any wish come true. I didn't believe it before, but now I want to give it a try. After walking up the 3,600 steps, I stood in front of the ancient tree with red wishing ribbons tied to it. I tied the wishing ribbon I had asked for to the branch, put my hands together, and prayed devoutly. I hope I can meet her. I hope we can be together forever. At the same time as I spoke, a soft, somewhat familiar female voice came out. The moment the words fell, the wishing ribbons on the whole tree suddenly flew up in the wind. A crisp bell sound came from the eaves. I glanced to the other side of the tree through the fluttering red. It's Sarah. Looking at her beautiful eyes and eyebrows, the idea of trying again suddenly emerged in my heart. If meeting once among millions of people is a coincidence, then what about meeting twice? I remember when I donated books one year, I wrote a sentence on the books. As long as you never give up, there will always be hope. I never gave up, so I really found her. Later I checked her past information and found out that she was with Michael. However, unexpectedly, she was injured and lost her memory by Michael not long after. Michael wanted to take the opportunity to get rid of her for his white moonlight. When I offered to help him, I said to him, "In the past, now, and in the future, Michael, you will never be related again." At that time, he was completely immersed in the joy of being with Bai Yueguang, and didn't pay attention to what I said. After that, I had someone search carefully for any traces of him and Sarah, and then I destroyed the evidence hastily, and then I destroyed it again myself. Until then, there is nothing to prove they were together, except Sarah herself remembers and is willing to admit it. Everyone said that I was just in a whim and doing it out of boredom. No one knew how nervous and cautious I was when I pushed open the door of the ward and stood in front of her. Even though I had long disappeared from her memory. But it doesn't matter, we can get to know each other again. We met for the first time in the afternoon, 18 years apart. It's also a long-awaited reunion. Over.